Single mom got fired after helping an injured man, but he turned out to be her billionaire boss. The autumn rain had not yet stopped when Elena Ross stepped out of her apartment building in Harborlyn, balancing an umbrella in one hand and her daughter's backpack in the other. The sky was still gray, the air sharp with salt from the nearby bay. "Come on, sweetheart, we're already running late," she urged gently, crouching so 8-year-old Sophie could slip her small arms into the straps. The girl's yellow raincoat hood framed her freckled face as she looked up with sleepy eyes. "I'm coming, Mom." They hurried down the slick sidewalk together, puddles rippling beneath their boots. Elena worked as a receptionist and office assistant at North Bay Logistics, a shipping company near the harbor. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid for rent, school lunches, and the inhaler Sophie needed on colder days. The problem was that the bus from their neighborhood only ran every 30 minutes. If she missed the one at 7:40, she'd arrive after 8, and her supervisor, Mason Kerr, would scold her again. Mason didn't like excuses, and certainly not those coming from a single mother. By 7:32, Elena and Sophie reached the corner bakery. "Hot chocolate or apple juice?" Elena asked quickly. "Chocolate," Sophie replied without hesitation, her dimples showing. While the barista filled the paper cup, Elena glanced at her phone. 7:35. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Finish this at school, okay? Mrs. Patel will pick you up at 3. Sophie nodded and ran toward the crosswalk where the school bus waited. Elena watched until the doors closed, then turned toward the main road leading to the bridge. Her umbrella flipped in the wind as she jogged. Traffic on the bridge was slow, waves crashing faintly beneath the steel beams. Cars crawled toward downtown. Elena's bus would pass soon, so she quickened her pace. Then, an awful sound tore through the air, the squeal of tires, a sharp metallic screech, and a dull crash. She froze. About 50 yards ahead, a silver sedan had slammed into the guardrail, its front end crumpled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the driver's side door stayed shut. Smoke curling from under the hood. Elena's stomach tightened. A man shouted something from a distance, but no one ran forward. The rain thickened, blurring everything. Without thinking, she dropped her umbrella and ran. "Sir, can you hear me?" she yelled as she reached the car. Through the cracked window, she saw a man in a dark suit slumped over the steering wheel, his forehead bleeding. She yanked the handle, locked. "Hang on," she said, circling to the passenger side, which had popped open slightly. She pulled with all her strength until it gave way. The smell of burnt rubber and spilled coffee hit her nose. "Don't move," she warned, kneeling beside him. "You might be hurt." The man groaned softly, trying to sit up. "It's my wrist," he murmured, wincing. His voice was deep but strained. Elena tore the wool scarf from her neck and pressed it gently to his forehead to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be okay," she said firmly, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's calm voice asked for details, and Elena gave the location quickly. "Ambulance on the way," she confirmed, glancing at the man. His breathing steadied, though his suit was soaked and mud stained his sleeve. "Thank you," he whispered, eyes fluttering open. They were strikingly blue, dazed, but focused on her face. "Don't thank me yet," she said softly. "You'll need a hospital." He tried to protest, muttering about a meeting he couldn't miss, but Elena shook her head. "Your meeting can wait. Your life can't." When the ambulance siren finally echoed across the bridge, relief washed over her. Paramedics took over swiftly, checking the man's pulse and securing his wrist in a splint. One of them asked her to step aside, and she did, clutching her soaked scarf. As they lifted the man onto a stretcher, he caught her eye again. "You should get to work," he said hoarsely, almost as if he knew she was late. Elena managed a faint smile. "I think that ship has sailed." He tried to respond, but the paramedics shut the ambulance doors before he could. The flashing lights faded into the rain, leaving only silence and the hum of passing cars. Elena looked down at her phone. 7:58 a.m. Her stomach dropped. Her bus had come and gone, and Mason would already be checking attendance. She sighed, wringing out the hem of her jacket. The scarf she'd used to stop the man's bleeding was stained crimson now. She tucked it into her bag, hoping it would wash out. Maybe if she hurried, she could still make it before the morning report ended. She started running, puddles splashing underfoot, breath coming hard. By the time she reached the corner bus stop, her hair clung to her cheeks and her shoes squelched with every step. The digital clock on the office tower across the street read 8:12. She whispered under her breath, "Please let him understand this time." But deep down, she knew Mason Kerr never understood. What Elena didn't know, what no one on that rainy bridge could have guessed, was that the man she'd just saved was Adrian Blackwood, the newly appointed billionaire CEO of North Bay Logistics, and that her act of compassion would soon cost her everything, before giving her far more than she ever imagined. By the time Elena reached the glass doors of North Bay Logistics, her heart was pounding from running the last 4 blocks. The rain had stopped, but her clothes were still damp, her hair clinging to her cheeks. She tried to smooth it back and take a steadying breath before pushing through the revolving door. The lobby smelled faintly of salt and disinfectant. Her badge beeped as she swiped in, 8:25 a.m. She winced, 25 minutes late. Maybe, just maybe, she could slip to her desk before Mason noticed. The hope vanished the moment she stepped into the office. Mason Kerr stood by the reception desk, arms folded, his expression tight as a wire. "Ross," he said sharply, "in my office, now." Every head in the open workspace turned toward her. Elena felt the familiar flush of embarrassment rise up her neck. She followed him silently past the rows of cubicles, her wet shoes squeaking on the tile. Inside his office, Mason shut the door with a soft thud. "Third time this month," he began, pacing behind his desk. "Do you know how that looks?" Elena clutched the strap of her bag. "I can explain. There was an accident on Harbor Bridge." Mason held up a hand. "Stop. I don't want another story. Every week it's something different. Sick child. Bus delay. Now a bridge accident?" His tone carried mock disbelief. "I helped a man who was injured," she said quietly. "He could have died if no one stopped." Mason's mouth curved into a cold half-smile. "You're not paid to save the world, Elena. You're paid to answer phones and file shipping logs on time. You think I can run a department around your moral detours?" Her hands tightened into fists. "I've never missed a deadline. My work is solid. You know that." He turned to his computer, tapping keys with exaggerated calm. "Company policy states that 3 tardies within 90 days result in termination. You signed it yourself." He slid a printed form across the desk. "Effective immediately." Elena stared at the paper, the words blurred. "You're firing me? For being late 20 minutes? After I helped someone injured?" Mason leaned back in his chair. "Yes, compassion doesn't pay invoices. Maybe this will teach you priorities." His voice was smug, final. Something inside her cracked. She stood there for a moment, every instinct screaming to defend herself. But the exhaustion of years of balancing rent, bills, and a child's needs pressed down harder. There was no use. "Understood," she said quietly. Mason looked almost disappointed she didn't argue. "Clear out your desk before lunch. HR will process your severance." He turned back to his screen as if she'd already disappeared. Elena walked out in a haze. Diane, her closest co-worker, met her at the cubicle, eyes wide. "What happened?" Elena tried to smile, but it came out brittle. "Apparently kindness doesn't count as punctuality." Diane pressed her lips together, slipping a tissue into Elena's hand. "I heard we're getting a new CEO visit this week. Maybe things will change." "Not soon enough," Elena whispered. She packed her few belongings into a small cardboard box. Her daughter's photo with a missing corner, a cracked coffee mug painted with "Best Mom," and a potted succulent that had somehow survived 6 months of fluorescent lighting. When she reached the elevator, She paused, looking back at the desk where she had spent the past 2 years. It felt surreal that a single moment of decency had cost her the one bit of stability she'd managed to hold. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, hugging the box to her chest. Outside, the midday light broke through the clouds. Harborland shimmered with puddles, sunlight glinting on wet asphalt. Elena walked slowly toward the bus stop, her shoes squeaking with every step. The cardboard softened in her hands as raindrops began again. She set the box down on the bench, exhaling. The framed photo of Sophie peeked out from the top. Her phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Patel. "Dear, are you at work?" the older woman's warm voice asked. "You usually text by now." Elena swallowed hard. "I'm actually not at work anymore. I got fired." There was a gasp on the other end. "For helping someone injured? Oh, for heaven's sake. What kind of place does that?" Elena let out a shaky laugh. "Apparently one that measures compassion by the minute." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patel said firmly. "You did the right thing. You come home, rest a bit. We'll figure it out." "I can't ask you to help again," Elena murmured. "You didn't ask," I offered. "That's what neighbors are for." The simple kindness hit harder than she expected. Tears stung her eyes. She wiped them quickly, aware of people passing by. "Thank you," she whispered. After hanging up, she sat in silence, watching seagulls circle above the harbor. Her reflection in the glass shelter looked pale, exhausted, older than 33. She whispered to herself, "You'll find something else. You have to." But deep inside, fear gnawed. Rent due in 10 days, Sophie's inhaler running low, savings barely enough for a month. As the next bus pulled up, Elena stood and gathered her box, clutching it like a fragile piece of herself. She stepped aboard, paid the fare with trembling fingers, and found a seat by the window. The city slid past in streaks of gray and gold. Somewhere downtown, an ambulance siren wailed faintly, a sound that made her chest tighten. She looked down at her stained scarf folded in the box, remembering the man on the bridge. "I hope he's okay," she whispered. What she couldn't know was that the man she'd saved, Adrian Blackwood, was alive, recovering, and already looking for the woman who had risked her morning to save a stranger in the rain. The following afternoon, the gray sky hung low over Harborland, heavy with the smell of rain. Elena sat in a corner booth of a small cafe near the harbor, her laptop open and her resume pulled up for the 10th time. The cursor blinked at her like a quiet accusation. She sipped coffee that had gone cold, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. She'd already applied to 3 office jobs that morning and had been politely rejected by 2. It had only been a day since she lost her job, but the fear of rent, bills, and Sophie's inhaler refill pressed down like a physical weight. She reached into her bag for her phone. Its screen cracked at the corner, and began scrolling through listings again when it suddenly rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered hesitantly. "Good afternoon. Is this Ms. Elena Ross?" The voice on the line was crisp, professional, female. "Yes, speaking." "This is Patricia Reed, Executive Assistant to Mr. Adrian Blackwood of North Bay Logistics. Mr. Blackwood would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9. Elena froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry, what? I no longer work there." "He's aware," Patricia replied, her tone softening slightly. "He specifically requested you. Please bring a valid ID. The meeting will take place on the 30th floor, executive wing." Elena's heart thudded. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "He didn't specify," Patricia said, "but he was very insistent. We'll see you at 9, Ms. Ross." The call ended before Elena could say another word. She sat there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. Adrian Blackwood. The name meant nothing at first, until she remembered the briefcase logo from the papers she had helped gather after the accident. North Bay Logistics. Her breath caught. Could it really be him? That night, Elena barely slept. She ironed her best navy blouse, one she'd worn to Sophie's parent-teacher meeting, and set out her only formal pair of heels. Sophie noticed her mother pacing the living room. "Mom, you look nervous," she said, peeking over her homework. "Big day tomorrow," Elena admitted, forcing a smile. "It might be an interview." Sophie tilted her head. "Then they'd be lucky to have you." The simplicity of her daughter's faith made Elena's chest tighten. She kissed her goodnight and whispered, "I hope so, sweetheart." The next morning dawned clear after a night of heavy rain. Harborland's skyline gleamed under pale sunlight, the streets still wet and glistening. Elena took a rideshare instead of risking the bus. She couldn't afford to be late again. Not this time. As the car approached the towering glass building of North Bay, her palms grew damp. She hadn't set foot inside since Mason had fired her 2 days earlier. When she stepped through the revolving doors, the same security guard looked up in surprise. "Ms. Ross," he said, checking his computer, "you're on the VIP list today. Take the executive elevator straight to floor 30. "The executive elevator?" she echoed, stunned. He nodded. "Mr. Blackwood's instructions." She murmured a polite thank you and walked across the polished marble floor, clutching her purse. The elevator was unlike the others, paneled in wood, silent as it rose. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale but determined. When the doors opened, she found herself in a sunlit corridor lined with abstract art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. A woman with silver-streaked dark hair stood waiting. "Ms. Ross? Patricia Reed. We spoke on the phone." Patricia's smile was professional but kind. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Would you like some water or coffee?" "Water, please," Elena said quietly, her throat suddenly dry. Patricia guided her through glass doors into a spacious office. Behind a wide walnut desk sat the man from the bridge. His right wrist was wrapped in a white bandage, and a thin scar traced his temple. But his eyes, the same calm, deep blue, were unmistakable. "Ms. Ross," he said warmly, rising slightly from his chair before motioning for her to sit. "I'm very glad you came." Elena took the seat opposite him, her pulse quick. "I didn't realize who you were," she said, voice trembling. "When I helped you that morning." "You weren't supposed to," he interrupted gently. "No one else stopped. You did." His gaze held hers with quiet gratitude. "I wanted to thank you properly, and also to apologize. I learned yesterday that you were terminated because of that morning." Elena blinked. "You know about that?" "I requested the incident report," Adrian said, leaning forward. "And I watched the traffic footage. You risked your safety to help me, and your manager punished you for it. That doesn't sit right." She hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't looking for anything in return. I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone would," he said simply. "And certainly not in the rain with a job on the line." Elena looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. The smell of faint cedar and coffee filled the room. Adrian continued, "I'd like to talk about an opportunity, something I believe you'd be perfect for." Her eyes widened, confusion flickering with hope. "An opportunity?" "Yes, but before we discuss that, I want you to know what happened to you won't be ignored. Your former supervisor has been suspended pending review." For the first time in days, Elena felt a small spark of justice. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I still need to find a new job. I can't rely on—" "That's what I want to talk about," Adrian said, his tone steady. "A new role, one that matters." He smiled faintly, a glint of something thoughtful in his eyes. "You saved a stranger's life, Ms. Ross. Now I'd like to see what happens if we work together." Outside, the sunlight glinted off the harbor water below, bright and restless, just like the feeling beginning to stir in Elena's chest. Elena sat still, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. Across the wide walnut desk, Adrian Blackwood closed a folder and leaned forward slightly, the morning light glinting off his bandaged wrist. "Before I tell you the details," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, "I want you to know this isn't charity. What I'm offering is based on what I've seen in you: integrity, courage, and judgment under pressure." Elena swallowed hard. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm just an office assistant. I don't have the qualifications for anything beyond that." He smiled faintly. "That's where you're wrong." He opened another folder and slid it toward her. "We're about to launch a new community program called Harbor Heart. It's designed to support single parents who work along the docks. Childcare, training, healthcare. The kind of things you've probably struggled with firsthand." Elena hesitated before glancing at the folder. Inside were draft flyers, statistics, and a mission statement. She traced the bold heading with her fingertips. "Harbor Heart Program," she read softly. Adrian nodded. "It's still in its early stages, but we need someone who understands what these families go through. Someone grounded and compassionate to coordinate operations and communication. I want you to take that position under a 90-day trial period. You'll report directly to me and to the board liaison." Elena blinked, startled. "Report to you? I don't think I'm qualified to lead a program." "You are," he said simply. "What you did that morning proved it. You acted decisively, not because it benefited you, but because it was right. That's the kind of judgment I want guiding this foundation." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner. Elena clasped her hands in her lap. "You hardly know me," she said finally. "I could mess everything up." "Then we'll learn together," he replied without hesitation. "You'll have a mentor. Patricia will train you on procedures, project management, and budget handling. It's not just about paperwork, Elena. It's about impact." He paused, then added quietly, "And for what it's worth, I trust my instincts. They rarely fail me." The words sank deep. Elena took a slow breath. "What about Mason Kerr?" she asked. "Will he just get away with what he did?" Adrian's expression hardened. "He's been suspended pending review. HR is conducting an audit of all disciplinary actions under his management. If there are other employees treated unfairly, we'll fix that." His tone carried quiet authority that made her believe him. She nodded slowly. "And the salary?" she asked, almost afraid to voice the question. "It's commensurate with the position," Adrian said, a flicker of humor softening his features. "Approximately double what you earned before, with full benefits and flexibility for parental obligations. I understand mornings can be unpredictable." Elena's throat tightened. "That would change a lot for us," she admitted. "For my daughter." "Sophie," Adrian said, remembering her name from the file. "She's 8, right? Smart and curious, from what I've heard." Elena smiled faintly, surprised he remembered. "She wants to be an astronaut one day. She says gravity's just a challenge." Adrian chuckled. "Then she takes after her mother." The warmth in his tone made her blush. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small silver object wrapped in cloth. "Before you decide," he said, placing it on the desk, "I want to give you this." When she unwrapped it, she found a polished silver pin shaped like a compass, engraved with the words, "Courage began on this bridge." Her breath caught. "I had this made last night," Adrian explained. "A reminder that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, can lead to new directions. If you accept this position, consider it your badge." Elena stared at the pin, then at him. Her heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Why me, really?" she asked softly. "You have hundreds of employees, most with degrees and experience." Adrian's eyes met hers steadily. "Because they've been taught to follow rules. You reminded me why we have them. To serve people, not punish them. I want that reminder close to this company's core." For a long moment, she said nothing. Outside the window, the harbor glittered, sunlight dancing over the water. Seagulls circled near the docks, their cries faint through the glass. She thought of Sophie eating breakfast alone that morning, of the bills stacked on the counter, of the way her heart had sunk when Mason handed her the termination notice. Then she thought of the man on the bridge, pale and hurt, thanking her even as she worried about losing her job. Maybe this was what that moment had been leading to. "I'll accept the trial period," she said finally, voice steady. "But I want to earn it. Not because of what happened on the bridge." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," Adrian replied, smiling. He stood carefully, extending his uninjured hand. "Welcome to Harbor Heart, Ms. Ross." When she shook it, something shifted inside her, something like relief, but deeper. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a storm she had to survive. It felt like a sunrise waiting to happen. 3 months later, the air over Harbor Lynn carried the scent of salt and blooming jasmine from the waterfront gardens below North Bay's main tower. Elena Ross could hardly believe how much her life had changed. She now arrived at work through the same lobby where she'd once been escorted out with a cardboard box, but this time the security guard greeted her with a smile. "Morning, Ms. Ross," he said. She smiled back, adjusting her ID badge that now read, "Executive Assistant, Harbor Heart Program." It still felt surreal. The first few weeks had been overwhelming. Training with Patricia on scheduling, learning the hierarchy of executives, and balancing reports with outreach visits to the docks. But Elena had grown into the rhythm. Each day she saw single parents whose struggles mirrored her own. Mothers counting coins for daycare. Fathers juggling 2 jobs to keep their homes. The Harbor Heart Initiative was becoming more than paperwork. It was a lifeline. Still, not everyone welcomed her rise. The whispers started small. An overheard comment in the break room, a smirk when she passed. "Guess it pays to save the boss," someone muttered once. By the end of the first month, she could feel eyes on her whenever she and Adrian walked the same hallway. He seemed aware, but chose not to address it in front of others. One evening, as they reviewed a presentation slide deck in his office, she finally said, "People think I got this job because of that day." Adrian looked up from his laptop. "You earned this job because you're good at it." She hesitated. "You could announce that publicly, maybe, just so—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You don't owe anyone proof. Let your work speak first. When the results come in, they'll know." True to his word, he helped her make results impossible to ignore. By the end of the quarter, Harbor Heart had connected over 60 families with part-time jobs, childcare grants, and housing support. Adrian released an internal memo highlighting the program's impact and listing every team member by contribution, placing Elena's name at the top as project lead. The next morning, the office tone shifted. People greeted her more warmly. Even those who had whispered before now nodded with quiet respect. That evening, Elena stayed late to finish the final donor report. The office was quiet except for the rain against the tall windows. Adrian appeared at her door holding 2 mugs. "Chamomile or coffee?" he asked. "Chamomile," she said, smiling tiredly. He set the mug beside her and glanced at the spreadsheet on her screen. "You've done a remarkable job. The board is impressed." "It's a team effort," she replied automatically. "You've said that before," he said, leaning lightly on the edge of her desk. "But we both know you've carried more weight than most. You never complain." She looked up at him, the dim light softening his usually sharp features. "I've had worse days," she said quietly, "and better bosses." The faintest grin tugged at his mouth. "Is that your way of saying I'm tolerable?" "On good days," she teased. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, familiar yet new. He broke the silence first. "The board's hosting a press luncheon next week. They'd like you to speak briefly about Harbor Heart. You don't have to, but I think your story could inspire more support." Elena froze. "My story." You don't need to mention details. Just tell them why it matters, why families like yours need this. She nodded slowly. I'll think about it. When she finally packed up to leave, the city outside shimmered with rain. Adrian insisted on walking her to the lobby, his umbrella large enough for both. You don't have to do this, she said, as they stepped into the drizzle. You helped me when I couldn't stand, he replied simply. It's only fair I return the favor. The elevator chimed as they reached the ground floor. She turned to thank him, but his gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Get some rest, Elena. You've earned it. At home, Sophie ran to her the moment she opened the door. Mom, guess what? My teacher picked my essay for the bulletin board. Elena crouched, hugging her daughter tightly. That's amazing, sweetheart. What was it about? Heroes, Sophie said proudly. I wrote about people who help others, even when it's hard. Elena's breath caught. That sounds beautiful. Sophie grinned. I said heroes aren't just in books. Sometimes they're moms who help strangers in the rain. Elena blinked away sudden tears. That's quite a story, she whispered. Sophie nodded, already pulling her toward the table. And I drew the bridge too. The sketch was simple but bright. A woman holding out her hand to a man by a car, rain falling around them. A tiny silver star on her jacket. Elena traced it with her finger, smiling through the ache in her chest. Later that night, when Sophie was asleep, Elena sat by the window, the compass pin glinting on her blazer. She thought about the day she'd walked out of North Bay in tears, and the path that had brought her back. The city lights reflected in the harbor below, restless and bright, like the life she was finally rebuilding. Somewhere inside, she felt the faint hum of pride, steady, quiet, and entirely her own. The morning of the Harbor Heart launch was supposed to be clear, but the weather changed without warning. By noon, dark clouds rolled over Harborland Bay, and wind whipped the banners outside North Bay's distribution center, where the supplies for the Foundation's first event were stored. Elena Ross stood by the loading dock, clipboard pressed to her chest, shouting above the rising wind. Secure the crates! Don't leave the tents near the edge! Her voice carried urgency but not panic. 3 months in this job had taught her how to stay composed when everything went wrong. Adrian had gone to meet a news crew downtown, but his car was on its way back. She checked her watch. 10 minutes, she murmured, rain starting to fall in cold sheets. Inside the warehouse, volunteers rushed to move boxes of blankets, food kits, and medical supplies away from the leaking roof. Elena joined them, sleeves rolled to her elbows, water dripping from her hair. A loud crack split the air as a section of the ceiling frame gave way, sending a shower of plaster dust and water onto the floor. "Everyone out!" she yelled. They scrambled toward the exit. As the last volunteer cleared the door, Elena spotted the binder containing the registration lists. Every name of every family scheduled to receive help the next morning, still lying on a table near the collapse zone. Without thinking, she darted back in. Rain poured through the broken roof, soaking the concrete. She grabbed the binder, slipping slightly as she turned. Her heel caught on a loose cable, and she fell hard, pain shooting through her wrist. The binder skidded out of reach. She crawled toward it, clutching it to her chest as the sound of tires screeched outside. "Elena!" Adrian's voice cut through the storm. He appeared at the doorway, drenched, his suit jacket plastered to his frame. "You shouldn't be in here." He hurried toward her, helping her to her feet. "You're hurt." "It's just a sprain," she gasped, wincing. "I couldn't leave the list. Without it, those families won't get their supplies tomorrow." He shook his head, half frustrated, half amazed. "You risked yourself for a binder." She looked up at him, hair stuck to her face, eyes fierce. "No, for people. They trusted us." Something in her tone made him go still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm hammered against the tin roof, the sound deafening, isolating them from the world outside. Adrian gently guided her toward the door. Come on. The rescue crews are checking the structure. They found temporary shelter in a canvas relief tent that volunteers had set up near the parking lot. Inside, lantern light flickered on their faces. Adrian unwrapped a roll of bandage from a first aid kit and knelt to inspect her wrist. It's swollen, he said softly. You should see a doctor. Later, she replied. There's too much to finish tonight. He tied the bandage carefully, his fingers steady. You remind me of someone, he murmured. My sister. She was the same. She'd throw herself into a storm if it meant helping someone. What happened to her? Elena asked. She passed away 5 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. She left behind a little boy. That's why this foundation matters to me. No child should lose safety because life is unfair. Elena looked at him, her chest tightening. She'd never seen this side of him before. The man behind the perfect suit and polished speeches. You built this program because of her, she said softly. Partly, he admitted, and partly because of you. That morning on the bridge reminded me of her courage. I realized I'd stopped living by the values she believed in. His voice faltered slightly, raw with honesty. You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. The rain beat harder, but the tent felt strangely calm. Elena's eyes glistened. You don't owe me that kind of gratitude, she said. I just did what anyone would do. Not everyone would, Adrian replied. And certainly not with everything to lose. His gaze lingered on her face, and the air between them grew still. You've changed this place, Elena. You've changed me. She opened her mouth to answer, but words failed. Instead, she looked down at her wrist, at his careful bandage, at the silver compass pin on her jacket that caught the lantern light. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the storm raging outside, their breaths shallow and synchronized. Finally, Adrian spoke, his tone low but certain. When this storm passes, we'll rebuild together. The supplies, the warehouse, whatever it takes. Harbor Heart isn't about buildings. It's about people like you. She met his gaze, her throat tight. Then let's make sure no one is left behind. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the rain cascading down the tent's sides. Adrian reached out, his hand brushing hers, not in a gesture of romance, but of quiet understanding. You've done enough for one night, he said softly. Let me drive you home. She shook her head. I'll stay until they secure the site. He gave a small smile, the kind that carried both pride and worry. You're impossible. So I've been told, she murmured. Hours later, as the storm finally eased, the two of them stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, the city lights reflecting on puddles. Elena looked up at the dark sky, whispering, We'll be ready for tomorrow. Adrian followed her gaze. Yes, he said, and when the sun rises, everyone will know who made it possible. The storm that had battered Harborland through the night finally broke at dawn. The first sunlight glimmered across the bay, touching the puddles and torn banners outside the North Bay facility. Elena Ross arrived early, her wrists still wrapped in Adrian's careful bandage, her hair tied back beneath a clean blue cap with the Harbor Heart logo. The warehouse smelled of salt and fresh paint. Volunteers were already sweeping water out from the loading area, their laughter carrying in the cold air. The damage had looked impossible to repair only hours ago, yet somehow, by morning, it was ready. Adrian stood near the entrance, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand, talking to a small group of coordinators. When he noticed Elena, a smile flickered across his tired face. You're here early, he said. You didn't sleep. Neither did you, she replied, taking the spare list from his hand. Let's start checking the deliveries. He laughed quietly. Still giving orders. Still following them, she countered. By 9 o'clock, the first families began to arrive. Single mothers holding children close, fathers with calloused hands, grandparents who'd stepped in when no one else could. Elena guided them through the line, ensuring every family received what they needed. She recognized some from her early visits to the docks. One woman hugged her, whispering, "Because of this program, I got my job back." The words made her throat tighten. Across the crowd, Adrian watched her move from table to table, calm and focused, her voice soft but sure. He realized the foundation wasn't just her job. It was her story, multiplied 100 times over. By afternoon, the event was winding down. A gentle wind replaced the storm, carrying the smell of coffee and seawater. Reporters gathered by the stage where a banner read Harbor Heart Foundation, Launch Day. Adrian adjusted the microphone before stepping aside. "This program began as an idea," he said to the crowd. "But ideas don't come alive without people who care enough to act. Today, one woman reminded us that courage doesn't need permission. It just needs heart." He turned slightly toward Elena, who stood a few steps away, unsure whether to smile or hide. "Please welcome the woman who showed us what Harbor Heart truly means." The applause came like a wave. Elena took a steadying breath and stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the sea of faces. "3 months ago," she began, "I was standing outside this building with a box of my belongings. I'd just been fired for being late after helping someone hurt on the side of the road. I thought that moment ended my story, but it turned out to be the beginning." Her voice grew steadier. "I learned that one small act of kindness can ripple further than we ever imagine. This foundation exists because all of you, volunteers, families, co-workers, believed that compassion still matters in this world." The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. "So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for reminding me that doing the right thing is never wasted." When she stepped down, Adrian met her at the edge of the stage. "You just made the entire board cry," he whispered. She laughed, blinking back her own tears. "Including you?" "Maybe," he admitted. The event continued with music and food, children running between tables with balloons shaped like hearts. Sophie appeared among them, waving. "Mom, I found you!" She ran straight into Elena's arms, nearly knocking her off balance. "You did amazing," Sophie said proudly. Everyone was clapping. "You think so?" "I know so," her daughter said, with the fierce certainty only children have. "Mr. Blackwood said I could give you something." Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver badge shaped like a compass, identical to the one Adrian had given months ago, except this one was engraved with new words. "Courage continues here." "He said it's from both of us," Sophie explained. Elena looked up, eyes meeting Adrian's across the courtyard. He nodded slightly, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile playing on his lips. She pinned the badge beside the first one on her jacket, her chest tightening with emotion. "Tell him thank you," she whispered, and Sophie beamed, running off again to show other kids her balloon. As the sun began to set, painting the harbor gold, the volunteers packed up the last of the equipment. Adrian joined her near the pier, where the waves lapped gently against the posts. "It worked," he said softly. "Harbor Heart is alive." "Because of everyone," she replied. "Because of you," he countered. She turned to face him, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. "So what happens now?" "Now," he said, "the program grows, and you take the lead. I'll still be around, of course." His tone softened. "Maybe even for dinner now and then, if that's still allowed." She smiled. "Only if you let Sophie pick the restaurant." "Deal." For a long moment, they stood in companionable silence, watching the reflection of the city lights on the water. Elena felt the weight of the past months lift, the fear, the loss, the exhaustion, replaced by something lighter, steadier. When Adrian turned toward her, his expression was full of quiet pride. "You once said you wanted to earn everything, not be given it," he said. "You've done that, and more." She looked down at the badges on her jacket, their silver edges catching the fading light. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I didn't do it alone." As they walked back toward the building, Sophie waved from the car, holding up her balloon. Elena smiled, the compass pins glinting side by side, a reminder of where her courage began and how far it had carried her. Behind her, the banner flapped gently in the wind. Harbor Heart Foundation. Hope lives here. For the first time in years, Elena believed it completely. If you believe that kindness can change lives, share this story and keep the courage moving forward.